I'm going to give you my world, just to see if you'll burn it down. Billionaire Arthur Sterling didn't become the king of Manhattan by trusting people. He became a legend by testing them. He was tired of the fake smiles and the gold diggers, so he decided on a social experiment that would change 3 lives forever. He found 3 very different women, a struggling waitress, a high-end fashion model, and a quiet librarian, and handed each of them a black credit card with no limit. Spend whatever you want for 30 days, he told them. Before we get into what happened next, make sure to subscribe and watch until the very end, because the woman you least expect is the one who changes everything. Arthur watched from his glass tower as the first woman, Sarah the waitress, took the card with trembling hands. She lived in a tiny apartment with a leaking roof and owed thousands in medical bills for her sick mother. The tension was thick because Arthur expected her to run straight to a jewelry store or a car dealership. Instead, Sarah walked into a grocery store and bought enough food to fill a local food pantry. She didn't buy a single thing for herself, not even a new pair of shoes to replace her worn-out ones. Arthur stared at the digital tracking of the card, confused by her restraint. The second woman, Maya, was a model used to the finest things in life, but her career was fading fast. When she got the card, she didn't buy clothes. She went straight to a private investigator. Arthur felt a chill. Was she trying to dig up dirt on him to blackmail him? He followed her movements through the city, watching her meet a man in a dark alley. The tension peaked as money changed hands, but it wasn't for gossip. She was paying off the debts of her younger brother, who had fallen in with a dangerous crowd. The third woman, Grace the librarian, was the biggest mystery of all. She took the card and didn't spend a single cent for 3 whole days. Arthur began to wonder if she was playing a psychological game with him. On the 4th day, she finally swiped the card at a construction company. She wasn't building a mansion. She was buying a condemned building in a rough neighborhood. Arthur realized she was trying to create something, but he couldn't figure out why she was being so secretive about it. As the first week ended, Arthur invited all 3 women to a dinner at his private estate. He wanted to see if the power of the card had changed their personalities or made them arrogant. Sarah arrived in her same old waitress uniform, looking exhausted but happy. Maya arrived looking polished but terrified, clutching her purse as if she were hiding a weapon. Grace arrived with blueprints in her hand, her eyes glowing with a fire Arthur had never seen in a woman before. During the dinner, Arthur dropped a bombshell. He told them that one of the cards was actually linked to a criminal investigation, and the police were watching. This was a lie, a test to see who would panic and run. Sarah stayed calm, knowing her heart was pure. Maya turned pale and looked like she was going to faint, her secret debt clearing suddenly feeling like a crime. Grace simply pushed her blueprints across the table and told Arthur that if he wanted her arrested, he'd have to wait until the roof was fixed. The hour ends with a knock at the door that none of them expected. 2 men in dark suits entered the dining room, but they weren't the police. They were representatives from a rival billionaire who had been watching Arthur's experiment from the shadows. They told the women that Arthur was using them for a sick game and offered them $10 million each to walk away right now and never speak to him again. The look of betrayal on Sarah's face broke Arthur's heart, and for the first time in his life, the billionaire felt like he was the one being tested. The air in the room turned cold as the 3 women looked from the strangers to Arthur. Sarah felt like the floor had been pulled out from under her. She had started to think Arthur was a good man, not a puppeteer. The tension was unbearable as the men in suits opened a briefcase full of cash. Maya's eyes lingered on the money, thinking of her brother's safety, while Grace looked disgusted. Arthur sat in silence, his jaw tight, refusing to defend himself because he wanted to see if their integrity could be bought for a higher price than a credit card. Sarah was the first to speak, and her voice didn't shake this time. She told the men that she didn't care about their $10 million because she had already seen what real wealth looked like when she fed the hungry. She handed her black card back to Arthur, not out of anger, but out of a desire to be free from his games. Arthur felt a sharp pain in his chest. He hadn't expected her to give it up so easily. She walked out of the mansion, leaving the money and the billionaire behind, proving she couldn't be bought. Maya was different. She was tempted because the danger her brother faced was growing every hour. She reached for the briefcase, but then she looked at Arthur's eyes and saw loneliness that mirrored her own. She realized that if she took the money, she would be just like the people who had used her in the fashion industry for years. She pulled her hand back and told the strangers to leave. She didn't hand the card back to Arthur yet, but she told him she knew he was a broken man who used money as a shield. Grace didn't even look at the briefcase. She was focused on the blueprints for the community center she was building. She told the rival billionaire's men that they were interrupting a business meeting and she had no time for their drama. Her bluntness shocked everyone in the room. When the men finally left, defeated, Grace turned to Arthur and told him that his test was insulting, but she was going to finish the building anyway because the children in that neighborhood needed it more than he needed his pride. Arthur decided to follow Grace to the construction site the next day, hiding his identity by wearing plain clothes. He watched her work alongside the laborers, getting her hands dirty and organizing the supplies. He saw a side of humanity he had forgotten existed, hard work for the sake of others. However, danger was lurking in the shadows. A group of local thugs, upset that the condemned building was being turned into a community center, approached Grace with a clear threat. The thugs didn't know Arthur was watching from his car. When they grabbed Grace by the arm, Arthur didn't call his security. He jumped out of the car himself. He wasn't a fighter, but he was a man who had finally found something worth protecting. The confrontation was brief but intense, ending with the thugs retreating when they realized they weren't dealing with a helpless librarian. Grace looked at Arthur, seeing the dirt on his expensive shoes, and for the first time, a small spark of romance flickered between them. The hour concludes with a shocking discovery at the construction site. As they cleared out the basement of the old building, they found a hidden safe that had been buried for 50 years. Inside wasn't money or gold, but a series of letters addressed to Arthur's late father. It turned out that the building Grace chose wasn't random. It was the childhood home Arthur's father had lost during the Great Depression. The twist was that Grace had no idea, but the coincidence made Arthur realize that destiny was playing a bigger game than he was. With the discovery of the letters, Arthur's cold heart began to melt, but his past wasn't finished with him yet. He spent the next few days helping Grace renovate the old house, and the billionaire began to realize that true happiness didn't come from a bank account. However, he had neglected Sarah and Maya, and their lives were spiraling. Sarah's mother's condition had worsened, and without the card she gave back, she couldn't afford the new treatment. Arthur found out and felt a wave of guilt that nearly choked him. He went to the hospital to find Sarah, but she refused to see him. She thought his help was just another part of the experiment. The tension grew as the doctors told Sarah they needed the payment immediately or they would have to move her mother to a lower care facility. Arthur didn't use his name. He made an anonymous donation to the hospital to cover everything. He watched Sarah cry with relief through the glass window, knowing he couldn't take credit for it without ruining the lesson she had taught him. Meanwhile, Maya's situation turned deadly. The men her brother owed money to weren't satisfied with the small payments she had made. They kidnapped Maya to use her as leverage. When Arthur couldn't reach her, he realized his experiment had put her in the crosshairs of real criminals. He used his vast resources to track her location to a warehouse by the docks. This wasn't a game anymore. It was a rescue mission that could cost him his life. Arthur arrived at the warehouse alone, against the advice of his head of security. He walked into the dim light, facing 3 armed men who didn't care about his billions. They wanted blood. Arthur offered them anything they wanted in exchange for Maya's safety. The tension was at a breaking point as the lead kidnapper held a knife to Maya's throat. Arthur realized that all his money couldn't stop a blade, and he had to use his wits to distract them long enough for the police to arrive. After a terrifying struggle, the police swarmed the building and Maya was saved. She clung to Arthur, sobbing, realizing that he had risked his life for her. This wasn't about the credit card or the test anymore. It was about 2 people who had been lonely for too long. Arthur realized he was falling for both Maya's strength and Grace's vision, creating a complicated emotional triangle that he wasn't prepared to handle. He brought Maya back to his estate to recover, but Grace was already there, working on the next phase of the community center. The meeting between the two women was awkward and filled with unspoken tension. They both cared for Arthur now, but for very different reasons. Grace saw the man he could be, while Maya saw the man who had saved her. Sarah, having heard about the rescue, arrived at the gates as well, wanting to thank the anonymous donor she suspected was Arthur. The hour ends with all three women standing in Arthur's grand hallway, demanding the truth. They wanted to know why he really started the experiment. Arthur looked at them, his eyes filling with tears, and confessed that he was dying. He had been diagnosed with a terminal illness months ago and wanted to find people worthy of inheriting his empire. The test wasn't for his amusement. It was a search for an heir who wouldn't be corrupted by his wealth. The revelation of Arthur's illness changed everything. The anger the women felt evaporated, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. They weren't looking at a powerful billionaire anymore. They were looking at a man who was terrified of leaving the world without making a difference. Sarah, Maya, and Grace decided to stay at the estate to help Arthur manage his final months. The story shifted from a game of money to a battle for time. Arthur began to teach them how to run his companies, but he also learned from them how to live. Sarah took over the charitable arm of the Sterling Empire. She didn't just give away money. She visited the people she helped, making sure the funds were used to build lives, not just buildings. Arthur watched her with pride as she transformed his cold corporate image into something human. However, a board of directors within Arthur's company started a coup. They didn't want a waitress in charge of billions and began plotting to have Arthur declared mentally unfit. Maya used her knowledge of the high-stakes world of fashion and media to fight back against the board. She discovered that the chairman of the board was the one who had sent the men to bribe the women in the first place. He was trying to sabotage the experiment from the start. The tension rose as Maya gathered evidence of his corruption, using the same skills she used to survive the modeling world. She was no longer a victim. She was a protector of Arthur's legacy. Grace focused on the childhood home and the letters they found. She discovered that Arthur had a sister he never knew about, someone his father had kept secret to protect her from the family's enemies. The search for this mystery sister became Arthur's dying wish. Grace spent nights in the archives, following a trail of breadcrumbs that led to a small town in the Midwest. The emotional stakes were higher than ever as Arthur's health began to fail rapidly. The tension peaked when the board of directors staged a hostile takeover during a live televised event. They tried to shame the three women, calling them gold diggers and charity cases. Arthur was too weak to attend, but he watched from his bed. Just as the chairman was about to sign the papers to dissolve Arthur's authority, Sarah walked onto the stage. She didn't use a lawyer. She used the hearts of the people Arthur had helped over the last few months. Thousands of people whom Sarah had helped showed up outside the building, protesting the board's greed. The cameras turned to the crowd, and the chairman realized he had lost the public support. Maya then stepped forward and released the evidence of his bribery and criminal connections. It was a total victory for the women Arthur had chosen. They had proven that integrity and loyalty were more powerful than corporate greed, but the victory felt hollow without Arthur there to see it. The hour ends on a bittersweet note. Grace returned from her trip with a woman who looked exactly like Arthur's mother. It was his sister. The reunion was silent and tearful, occurring in Arthur's final hours. But as the sun set over the city, Arthur pulled the three women close and told them the most shocking thing of all. He wasn't actually dying. The terminal illness was the final part of the test to see who would stay when the money was gone, and only the man remained. The silence in the room was deafening after Arthur's confession. The women stood back, stunned and hurt. They had grieved for him, fought for him, and changed their lives for him. Sarah felt betrayed because she had shared her deepest fears with a dying man. Maya felt manipulated, and Grace felt like her research into his family had been used as a pawn in a cruel game. Arthur stood up from his bed, looking stronger than he had in weeks, and tried to explain that he had to be sure. He told them that he had seen many people pretend to be loyal when the checkbook was open, but he needed to see who would be loyal when there was nothing left but a failing body. He apologized, his voice breaking, admitting that he had lost sight of the human cost of his experiment. The three women didn't forgive him immediately. They walked out of the room, leaving the billionaire alone in his massive house, realizing that while he had passed his own test of wealth, he had failed the test of friendship. Days passed, and Arthur waited for them to come back, but they didn't. He went to the community center, but Grace wouldn't look at him. He went to the hospital, but Sarah was busy with her mother. He went to Maya's new office, but she had him blocked by security. He realized that he had won the war for his company, but lost the people who made his life worth living. He decided to do the only thing he could. He gave away his entire fortune. Arthur set up a trust that gave Sarah, Maya, and Grace full control over his billions, with the condition that he had no say in how it was spent. He moved out of his mansion and into a small apartment in the neighborhood where Grace was building the center. He started working as a volunteer, carrying boxes and painting walls. He didn't use his name or his influence. He wanted to earn their respect back by being a man of action, not a man of money. Slowly, the ice began to melt. Sarah saw him working at the food pantry every morning. Maya saw him helping her brother get a legitimate job at a local garage. Grace saw him at the construction site every day, doing the hardest jobs without complaint. They realized that he wasn't just apologizing with words, he was changing his entire soul. The romance between Arthur and Grace began to bloom again, but this time it was built on a foundation of truth, not a credit card. The climax of the story happens a year later at the grand opening of the Sterling Community House. The three women stood on the stage, now powerful leaders in their own right. They invited Arthur up, not as their boss, but as their friend. He stood before the crowd, looking at the three women he had once tried to test. He realized that they hadn't been the ones being tested, They had taught him that money is only a tool, and the real value of a person is found in what they do when they think no one is watching. The story ends with a final twist. As Arthur walked off the stage, a young woman approached him holding a black credit card. She told him that she found it on the street and wanted to return it to the owner. Arthur looked at the card, then at the girl's honest face and smiled. He didn't take the card back. He told her to keep it and use it to change the world, just like three women once did for him. He walked away into the sunset with Grace, finally knowing what it meant to be truly rich.